Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Talent Views, a virtual series where we talk to trailblazers in the field of all things talent. My name is Anu Rao, and I oversee the marketing function here at the Indotronics Vani Group. Now, what do? We connect clients with talent by providing staffing services to large corporations and government entities across the US, Canada, Europe, and India. It gives me immense pleasure today to welcome Eric Osterhout to our virtual stage. I have been following him over the years on LinkedIn and various events and love what he has to share. And I'm a better contingent workforce supplier for that. Eric is an accomplished CCWP and SOW management expert with over 17 years of experience in buyer-side contingent workforce management and employee and non-employee compliance. He has proven expertise in VMS/MSP program optimization, sourcing and selection, implementation project/engagement management, and supply-based management. He has been recognized for spearheading successful contingent direct slash self-sourcing initiatives, resulting in substantial program savings and increased efficiency. An industry influencer, it is not at all surprising that Eric is a three-time recipient of Staffing Industry Analysts Gamechanger Award. Welcome, Eric.
Well, thank you, Anu. You're too kind, and thanks for inviting me on here. And I'll make sure I send that check for that lovely introduction. I sure appreciate it. I'm glad to be here with everybody today, and hopefully you will leave with some tips and maybe some ideas, and that can help you improve not only your program as a buyer, but also your program skills as a supplier of talent.
Thank you so much, Eric. What I'll do is I'll ask you the first question and also launch the poll. The first question is just to set the stage. What is direct sourcing? And what are the goals typically of direct sourcing?
Well, my definition, which should be pretty close to the industry standard for direct sourcing, is being able to attract talent, utilizing or leveraging your organizational name as a buyer, right? If you have name recognition in the marketplace, many times it's much easier to attract talent, contingent talent, utilizing that name because it's recognizable and there's a comfort level that people may feel a little bit more comfortable engaging with the client and not just with the staffing provider up front. Although direct sourcing does utilize a supplier to manage the relationship between the consultant, contractor, contingent worker, and the organization. You have to have an employer of record for sure. So you're still working for a supplier in that regard. It's just a select supplier that's been vetted to work with the organization, and it's co-branded with the program that you have. So that's probably a little more complex on the definition of that, but I'll simplify it. I usually liken this to direct sourcing is essentially payrolling on steroids. The reason why I say that is that many times you have organizations that are exploring on the buyer side of adding a direct sourcing component to their program. And one of the first obstacles or hurdles they encounter would be that maybe legal puts up their hand and says, whoa, wait a second, we're concerned about this. And, we think that this may be a risk to us from, co-employment nature, among other things. So what I liken this to is tell them to go back and say, hey, look, do you have a payrolling program in place at your organization that you take referrals to rather than just placing them with any of your supply base, your sourcing supply base? And many times the answer that comes back is that, yeah, we sure do. We have a designated payroll supplier. We've negotiated great rates with them, blah, blah, blah. And say, okay, well, this is no different. Direct sourcing essentially is no different than payrolling. I call it, again, payrolling on steroids is what it is. You're actually taking what you've been doing with just internal referrals, and Bob's got a neighbor or Susie's got a neighbor or a friend, or they met somebody at a coffee shop that can do the job, and you place them with the payrolling agent. What you're doing differently is either internally in your organization, if you have If you have the bandwidth and the headcount and the budget to be able to create your own internal curation team, to be able to source that talent and manage that talent in talent pools, to be able to call upon those workers when you need them, that's great. Otherwise, you can also outsource that function to a curation partner in a managed direct sourcing scenario. And that is a very cost-effective way as well to manage that if you do have a very lean contingent labor procurement team. I've never been fortunate enough to work on programs or work with programs or clients or employers that have that luxury of, hey, we can get you all the headcount and budget you need to do things. It's always had to be in conjunction with an MSP. So just to kind of simplify it, it's payrolling on steroids. And if you're encountering initial pushback from legal, if you have a payrolling program already, just go back and ask them and say, look, how is this different than what we have in place with our existing payroll supplier that gives us a favorable rate on folks that we find? Many times they'll say, well, yeah, you're right, it's really not that different. And then what they will probably pivot to, and maybe this is a further question, but I'll answer it anyway. Maybe they'll pivot to, well, yeah, but we've got concerns about, putting out a public portal with our name on it, and it's not clear. Okay, well, the answer is, what we'll do is the curation partner, whether it's internal or externally managed, whoever is the AOR or payrolling provider or the curation partner, we'll make sure we co-brand the sites. It will still have our name as the main name, as the client, the customer name that you're leveraging to attract talent. But you will also be able to have that co-branding to make it clear that these are contingent roles and that you will be working for a different supplier. It still brings that comfort level down to the actual candidate, because they know that this has been hand selected and hand picked, and this is the relationship that they'll have. So there's an additional comfort level and success factor that's built into there, and no pun intended there. I didn't mean to reference somebody else's brand success factor, but just kind of came out. Anyway, hopefully that handles the definition or question about what is direct sourcing. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think there's a lot of hype and a lot of complexity that is presented out in the marketplace, and at the end of the day, it's really pretty simple and very low risk. So more than happy to discuss that further as we go along here.
Thank you so much, Eric. And that is the reason I wanted to set the stage, because we want one definition to go ahead with and then work off the rest of the discussion. Now, before I go into the next question, I do want to tell the audience that as you have questions, please put it in. Don't hold it till the end. Just put it in the chat, because Eric would love to answer those questions. If it is relevant, we'll do it as we go along or towards the end. Now, going to the second question, Eric. Now, what role does technology play in optimizing direct sourcing for contingent workforce management, like tech platforms and any such thing?
Actually, when you're deploying an initiative like a direct sourcing initiative, technology plays a great part in that, in creating efficiencies and also creating success of building talent pools. One of the things I'll start off with is that there are probably, it's like a tripod. That's the word I'm looking for. You've got three legs to a tripod. Well, the same thing with a direct sourcing initiative. You need to have a curation team, whether it's internal or externally managed, to be able to locate, attract, and manage the talent that comes into and put it into talent pools, and also to be able to match the requisitions that are coming from the contingent labor program to the direct sourcing program, to be able to match those against the candidates in the talent pool and also the candidates that are inbound based on the technology you're going to deploy. So you have the people piece up front. That's one part of it. The second most important part is the technology, and that is a technology that can exchange data between the direct sourcing team's platform to attract talent and pool talent and curate talent, to be able to take those requisitions from the vendor management system, perhaps we'll use that as an example, and be able to then pass candidates and data back from the direct sourcing team into the vendor management system, which will be the system of record for your contingent labor, just like it always is in any other situation with a supplier. And so those two components are important. And then you've got the third component, which is also arguably equally as important, and that is your employer of record services or your agent of record services provider, or what we like to call a payrolling supplier in contingent labor shorthand, right? You want to be able to have that in place as well. Now, the technology needs to be of a quality and a caliber, and from the buyer side, you want a technology that can talk to the VMS technology you have. I'm not going to specify which one that a company should go with, because all companies have a different tech stack, and all companies have nuances that will work better with different technologies. But that technology needs to be able to facilitate the exchange of data between the vendor management system and the direct sourcing team. It also needs to be able to take those inbound requisitions and be able to create jobs and postings out on a public facing portal. I said this once before, I think it was at SIA last year and the year before. I think it was last year. One of the things that always kind of made me a little bit of a pariah in my first role on the buyer side in 2008 was, one of my first questions was like, hey, this is great, this VMS MSP stuff, but when can we start attracting John Q Public or Josie Q Public and just go direct? And we don't need suppliers in that case. And I remember people looked at me like I had grown an arm out of my forehead or stepped off a spaceship. And they're like, it just doesn't work like that. But why not? Anyway, fast forward 2014, 15, 16, things, it's becoming more mainstream. And now in 21, 22, 23, you're seeing a lot of organizations realizing that this is possible. And the fact is, the technologies are out there to be able to basically build and attract talent from the public, bring it into talent pooling, vet it, curate it, and then attach it against or match it to requisitions that are coming inbound or outbound from the VMS inbound to the direct sourcing team. That technology is out there to do that. The other thing that's important in the technology piece for the buyers out there that may be going down the road of this is to look at the different technology platforms, find out which ones really match your tech stack and really do some digging. Talk to people that have been through this, people like myself that can advise. You see my shirt, I'm available. So talk to me if you want to find out more about what the technology stacks would match best with and things like that. There's some really good platforms out there. It's a relatively young segment of the industry right now, but there's some really top-notch players, and there's a couple of new ones that have come out there. And I see on the horizon other companies that are providers of technology to staffing suppliers, for example, that are learning that they can pivot what they're using to attract talent to their own organization to be able to build these public portals. I think we're going to see a lot of that coming up. And I'm going to throw this little tidbit out there. The technology is incredibly important because you do need to have that. But your curation partner is also quite important. And one of the pro tips I'll leave here today, because I know we have a mix of buyers and suppliers, and it really occurred to me after having a conversation and giving some tips and advice to a potential program buyer that was potentially, and they did end up developing and putting a direct sourcing initiative on into their program. One of the key things he listened to me say was something that I said randomly, which is that if you are a buyer and if you are a supplier, let's look at it from supplier first. It kind of ties to the buyer. But if you're a supplier and you're a long-term supplier at an organization, at a client organization, and you've been incredibly successful, you understand their business, you're one of their top suppliers consistently, perhaps maybe you want to consider moving into the curation role, right? It's a little bit different path, and it requires a little bit different technological use and different pricing. But it is something that could be beneficial to suppliers. The reason why I say this is I've been known and have been recorded on the internet saying this, that there will always be a need for suppliers, but direct sourcing will mean that only the best, most capable, highly efficient, and from a service delivery perspective, suppliers will be the ones that survive. I think taking that chance and moving to, pivoting your organization and being agile in today's world makes a lot of sense, particularly if you've been a long-term successful supplier, always tops in statistics. It might make sense if they're pursuing or discussing putting in place a direct sourcing program that you put your hat in the ring to talk about being the curation partner. And the reason why I say that is you understand their business, and have been consistently successful in placing folks at that organization. And I think having that insight and knowing the culture, the technologies, just the environment, everything that goes into becoming a successful supplier could position you very well to become a great curation partner for them if they choose to go manage direct sourcing. So just a food for thought kind of thing on that perspective. But the technology is important, that it talks to the technology from the vendor management system, and also can be able to put forth a public facing portal to attract talent, get the requisitions out there, get them found. I mean, having the ability to get those at the top of the, what do they call it? The search engine statistics, what is the SEI optimization, that sort of thing, to get those recs seen. So that would be where I'm going to stay or stand on the technology as the role of importance. But it's definitely, all three pieces are important to have a successful direct sourcing program.
Thanks, Eric. And I took down notes as a supplier. I hope others did too. I liked how you broke the technology piece on what suppliers need to be doing to up their game in this whole direct sourcing initiative, and what buyers can be doing. And I hope people took down notes. So now we'll talk about direct sourcing. Of course, is about here we are talking about sourcing talent directly. Now, how can companies effectively integrate direct sourcing strategies into their already existing talent acquisition processes?
Yeah, I think traditionally in many organizations, there has been a little siloization. And I know in our industry, we've been talking about the elusiveness of total talent management and total talent acquisition for at least a decade. And it still hasn't become seamless. I think some organizations are further ahead than others. One thing that I will say is that, I'm probably going to say more than one thing. You know how I am. What I'm going to say is that I think that building a contingent labor direct sourcing program or initiative and having it be successful, and showing the organization, evangelizing it internally to show how successful we're able to locate contingent labor based on the brand, I think will also go a long way to helping you build those bridges with talent acquisition, to be able to say, look what we're doing here. Don't keep putting us in the corner here. Utilize us as another sourcing engine for your group. We don't want to be the one that has to go out and do the interviews and do the final offers and negotiate pay and all that kind of stuff. We'll leave that on your side of the fence. Talent acquisition still needs to be involved. They're the ones that get the headcount approval on their side, but it gives us a chance to build a bridge to be able to utilize and leverage in both ways. We can eventually send them talent if they're open to it, and they can, vice versa. They can send talent back to the direct sourcing team for contingent. I know on the talent acquisition side, many times they'll have a requirement, and there'll only be one opening approved for headcount, budget wise, and things like that. But yet they'll come to me and say, "Hey, look, man, we had 2 or 3 good candidates for this that were real close. The one we went with only edged them out by a hair, and man, we sure wish we could utilize them somewhere else." Well, hey, send them an invite to join the contingent labor talent community, because in the meantime, they can be working on a contract basis, and many organizations are starting to get wise to the fact that really you can do a lot of try it before you buy it by leveraging talent that's provided by your contingent labor program to be onboarded as a full-time employee later down the road as an employee direct to the organization. So I think there's a lot of benefit in working with talent acquisition, and it will allow you, if you build one of these programs, to be able to have more interaction and more, you can kind of build that relationship and build that bridge. People are always interested in helping each other out if there's proven success, and if they feel like they're a part of what you're doing. And if you can talk to them and be able to get them to be able to start exchanging data. Some programs, it doesn't even have to be formalized. You don't have to have a direct feed from talent acquisition, but just getting to know the talent acquisition folks and say, hey, look, if you've got 2 other candidates or silver medalists, so to speak, send them our way. Send them an invite and say, hey, look, because they were that close to being the one that you went with, but next time they may be the perfect candidate for it. So I think that helps build that bridge. And I think it can help make that, even on the contingent labor program side, it can help make you a partner to talent acquisition and, help us get to that, move that needle to the goal of total talent management, total talent acquisition.
There was one sentence that you said that really stood out to me. People are more willing to help if they feel part of the process, feeling part of what we are all doing. And that probably is what we need to appeal to when we are trying to build bridges with the various talent teams. Uh, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Another thing you mentioned was you have to be able to evangelize the case for direct sourcing, which helps me get to the next question. What you've handled a bunch of direct sourcing programs. So, what are some common challenges organizations face when implementing a direct sourcing program? And how can we proactively address these challenges to ensure long term sustainability?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say I've had many. I've done a couple now, some smaller than others. But what I will say is that the challenges exist. I think in many cases, you have organizations that have a contingent labor program that may not be as sophisticated and advanced and stable. I can't use stable because we always joked at my old company, steadier state was always what we're shooting for, because it's an industry that changes. When you're building a contingent labor program, it's never like, and there may be some companies that think about it this way. It's like, okay, we got it deployed. It's on autopilot now. But frankly, my experience in 4 or 5 different companies now is that it's never the case. It's never completely done. There's always changes. You're dealing with people, so there's always regulations involved, and just organizations buy other companies, they sell and divest other companies. It's never done. So you always shoot for steadier state. In fact, Dean Bergen and I used to joke about that a lot. About that, it's never going to be steady. It's always steadier state. Anyway, so I think that some of the challenges are with direct sourcing programs are similar in vein to the challenges people experience with statement of work programs and even other initiatives that really should be a little bit later in the process. I think we have some organizations, and like I said, they think that it's on autopilot, so nothing's going to change, but yet it's always changing. When you have a contingent labor program, I think in many cases, when people start looking at what I call advanced modalities like statement of work and direct sourcing, I think direct sourcing is probably easier to implement. But if you don't have a good handle on your initial contingent labor program service delivery, it's going to be a challenge. Many of the same challenges that you're having now are just going to translate downstream to your direct sourcing initiative. I think that a company needs to go ahead and make sure that they've at least got basic service delivery down steady and pat, and they have the ability to manage, and I hope they actively manage their supplier base to make sure that you've got good, meaningful statistics being tracked, such as performance statistics. Many people know the fact that I look at things from like when I was on the other side of the desk before 2008, and I was on the supplier side. And so I track statistics with suppliers. I call it efficiency. To me, efficiency of a supplier is how many requisitions do they receive from our program? How many do they accept? How many do they actually respond to? How many candidates do they submit? Do they max out their submittals? And then downstream to shortlisting, interviews, and placements. And to me, if they have a high placement rate against a high amount of requisitions received and requisitions responded to, I know they understand the business, and I consider that very efficient in that manner. In many organizations, they don't manage the supply base that effectively. They don't tier it out to make sure they don't overload the requisitions with too many suppliers, which will, at that point, it becomes too competitive for the suppliers, and they don't bring their 8 candidates there. When there's too many suppliers on a requisition, they take their rock star candidates and they go where there's less chance of having them snagged away by another supplier, and they can place them faster. So you have to manage that supply base and have it hopefully tiered out where you have your tier 1 players in a limited capacity based on geography, skill set, or however you want to do that. But having that meaningful statistics and that data to be able to do that will take you very far in your initial contingent labor program. And then as you make that jump and say, okay, we're at that point now, we've got a pretty good handle on contingent labor from a service delivery perspective through our program. Now let's jump and take that step to direct sourcing. Your odds are going to be much higher if you are at that point where you can focus on being able to, you fought a lot of the battles already on the contingent labor side. So now you can kind of set up your direct sourcing program for success. Now, along the way, when you do that, you're going to be able to, if you have the right technology in place, remember the part of the trio of what you need, that technology can provide you statistics as well as to where the leads are coming from, where the candidates are coming from, into the talent pools. You're going to be able to see the success rate. But I also say, look, use your data that you already have in place. On the VMS side, your vendor management system should be able to help you develop scorecards for your supply base. And essentially, your direct sourcing team is just another supplier, albeit they have a little bit of a head start because vendor neutrality goes out the window. This is about what's best for the organization, right? That's building the buyer side, using their name, leveraging it. It's not about vendor neutrality. It's about getting the best candidates. So utilize your technology that you have with your VMS to pull out scorecarding and manage the program in a way like any other supplier. The one thing I will say is because that a successful direct sourcing program usually gets a 48 to 72 hour head start on requisitions, because you want to be able to fill them leveraging your name. They need to be managed as well to make sure they're taking effective use of that time. If their numbers are not representative of, wow, they're really doing a good job in the way of placements. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of theories, schools of thought or theories out there about when you launch a direct sourcing program, you know what, we should only throw out to the direct sourcing team easy to fill, repeatable requisitions. While I agree with part of that statement, I also have found that very, very niche, high-tech skills or difficult to fill skills also can be very effective if you send those over in the mix to your direct sourcing team as well. And where I'm going with this is they may not fill it the first time, but if they're out advertising for these purple squirrel type candidates and they build talent pools around certain specific or specialized niches so they can recall those in the future, they may not get it the first time, but they will get it the second time. And the other thing I'm going to share with suppliers, because it really, frankly, kind of surprised me last year when I was looking at statistics and I was realizing that our Generation 2 direct sourcing program, where we had changed curation partners, had really been gaining traction, was I started noticing statistically in our most busy categories of spend under the contingent labor program, our most active distribution list, so to speak, that all of our suppliers were becoming less effective by the statistics from a hit rate perspective. And I couldn't figure it out for a while. And then in Q4, it dawned on me. We made the change to the different curation partner in Q3, beginning of Q3, and they were really just hitting it hard. And so what was happening is many of the roles, and many of them were easier to fill roles, were being filled by the direct sourcing team. But even the more complex roles were being filled by the direct sourcing team, which was impacting the two busiest distribution categories, which were engineering and IT. And so what I'm going to say is that be prepared as a supplier that a successful direct sourcing program will cause you to have to up your game on your recruiting side. And I know I catch a lot of heat on the internet and the interwebs and all that kind of stuff, and smoke signals and all that stuff, because I will sometimes call out suppliers about how they can up their game. And the reason why is because if a supplier is going to be successful, even outside of, if they're not a curation partner, but as a supplier in tier one, they're going to have to realize that the requisitions that are making it to the tier one distribution supply base, they're going to be more complex. And so they need to step up their game, and they've got to be laser focused as recruiters to be able to match talent to requisitions very, very quickly. And there may be some frustration along the way, because I've heard this from some suppliers that in direct sourcing programs, like, yeah, really frustrating. We build a pipeline, but man, everybody's been contacted by the direct sourcing team already. And it's bittersweet, but it also means that your direct sourcing program as a buyer is functioning the way it's supposed to. But it's bittersweet for your long-term suppliers that they have to work a little bit harder. They need to be more creative in how they locate talent. They need to be able to be jack snap fast, and they need to use tools and technologies to be able to attract and have those folks in their own pipelines if they're outside of the curation piece. So those are a couple of things that I would throw out there from both sides that I think would benefit. Buyers need to realize that if you do your direct sourcing program right, you're going to get better talent faster, better candidate experience, better hiring leader experience, because you're going to get a better quality candidate deployed faster. And so I think that's kind of what I will leave with the buyers. But on the supplier side, it's also like, yes, it's not all doom and gloom if you listen to me. It's about becoming an excellent provider and having that service excellence. We're always going to have a need for external suppliers in direct sourcing programs. We just don't need as many, right? So they have to be the cream of the crop. So I think that's a couple of things I will lay in there. Another benefit too, and this one goes to the buyers. If you set up your program correctly, and if you I'm going to throw out something a little controversial, right? Yeah, like that's something new for me. All right, so there is a perception out in the market, in the world, in the contingent labor land, that payrolling is always less expensive than supplier sourcing candidates. And to an extent, that is true if it, again, is managed correctly. And the reason why I say that is there's a perception out there, and if you ask 9 out of 10 people in an organization that has have a payrolling programs, if you ask them, well, where does the payroll provider or EOR, AOR provider, where do they get the pay rate for that worker that they're engaging? And 9 times out of 10, it'll be, I don't know, we just asked the hiring leader and he said the guy or lady said they want $100 an hour, and so we went with that, right? So that will skew your savings ability with your payrolling program, right? Because what if that worker to replace and source through your existing supplier base was only worth about $50 an hour, right? So you're already 50 over what you should be paying the worker. And then, yes, are you paying a slimmer percentage to your payroller because it's way more cost effective because they're not having to source for that worker? Yeah, undoubtedly. But the false perception is that if you don't control the pay side of the equation and have that data available, you are going to end up overpaying for your candidates. The same holds true with direct sourcing. If you do direct sourcing right, and if the partner, whether you're doing it internally and you're managing it yourself, you need to have tools and access to data to be able to understand that that $100 referral may be only worth 50 an hour, or you could source another one just as effectively at that cost. You will, if you do that right and manage that part of the process, you will ensure savings. One of the last points at my last organization, in that program, I think is a textbook for how it should be done, and it still is. We were saving, on average, on one of the last reports, about 20% off of market rates for talent. And that adds up very, very significantly and quickly. So those are, I guess, hopefully I answered the question on that, but feel free to ask more.
20%, that is, it's a no-brainer. But obviously, one of the first things you started off with, you said, on the buyer side, the basics service delivery has got to be set down right to even move on to the direct sourcing program successfully. Otherwise, the problems that you're having in the CW program will continue on in the direct sourcing program as well. We got a great comment on how to make the silver medalists be part of total talent management. Most staffing companies know how many cases we have of awesome candidates who come to being selected but are considered star silver medalists. Great point on using these as part of the total talent management solutions. And please continue with your feedback and your questions. We will take it as we go along. I did want to make a point at this juncture. Eric is dialing in from Houston, and that's been hit by a massive tornado right now. So he's on generator. He still joined in. I'm so thankful for that. Thank you, Eric.
Hopefully I'm not breaking up, but yeah, I'm in an undisclosed location 45 miles out of Houston. And yeah, we got hit pretty hard, and I've been on generator power for coming up on, I think the seventh day will be tomorrow. Tomorrow evening, Thursday, was when the tornadoes hit Houston area. And yeah, we're the power guys just kind of, one of my neighbors had caught one of them out while they were out trying to get stuff done. They said, yeah, you guys were hit really, really bad. It's going to be a while. And they're shooting for Friday to have us back on regular power. And thanks for the concern. I will say we were lucky. Many of our neighbors out here and friends, not quite as lucky. We had some tree damage. Nothing damaged our structures or anything like that. We didn't, we were fine and dry during the storm, but it was crazy. And the fact that I'd planned for this stuff, my old team that I worked with used to make fun of me because I especially during the freeze, I mean, I planned all this stuff out. We live in a hurricane prone area with occasional tornadoes, and I didn't anticipate a freeze like that. But so I have a disaster plan. The old project manager in me. So I have a DASD plan here. Anyway, but thanks for everybody. I'm hoping bandwidth continues to hold out.
So we'll get to the questions fast before any of that happens. So you already touched on a few of the measures of success, but just to reiterate and add to that, how do you measure the success of a direct sourcing program, and what KPIs should companies track to gauge success and identify areas of improvement?
Sure. Okay. So I kind of touched on this. I think having adequate scorecarding and data and being able to interpret that data and look for trending, I think will help tell the efficiency of your direct sourcing program. And many of the statistics carry over that you would normally use with any other supplier. One other thing I'm going to throw out here, another biggie pro tip for buyers, is if you're not driving competitive sourcing in your organization, you need to. And the reason why is that you will generate savings by competitively sourcing requisitions, even if you don't have a direct sourcing program, but you have a good set of suppliers that are operating within data-driven, not to exceed rates, so you know what the market rates are on a regular basis. Now, let me throw that out too, another pro tip. It's always going to be a look back when you deploy rate carding, okay? So you need to be open to that, and you need to have, if you are an MSP program managed team, your MSP, the suppliers that are managed by them under the program, need to be able to feel comfortable going back and saying, hey, look, based on the skill sets of this requisition, either we're missing something, but we're not able to provide candidates at that market-based rate that you have in the system for max not to exceed. In which case that the MSP team will usually say, hey, you know what? We've gotten a couple of our suppliers have come back with that feedback. We'll go back to the manager and just prepare them. It will be a little over the NTE. Great. Or what may happen is that the MSP team may say, you know what? We've already got people interviewing. We got one person that's really close to getting hired. And I don't know, maybe you need to go back with your recruiters and start playing the what if game a little harder with your candidates, because we're able to find talent at that level to be able to fill it. So that's one thing I'm going to throw out there is you have to have that information to be able to drive savings through your organization and to also monitor the performance. Your direct sourcing team, as long as they are adhering to, for the most part, what the data says pay rates should be, they will always be under the not to exceed market rate that you have in your system based on your rate carding, right? Where that becomes a problem, and I always say they should always be, but it's not necessarily 100%, is there are certain shades of gray in an organization. We all know that. In some organizations, there is a lot of spend that is actually contingent spend that may be going under the services side of the house, right? The SOW/services to get around the contingent labor program. The rates for those workers doing the same thing as your contingent labor workers are, your contingent workers, is usually going to be 30 to 35% higher on the bill rate side, because if something is services/SOW statement of work type engagements, they price in on that side of the house, the suppliers, they price in a certain amount of money into the bill rate to cover risk of performance, warranty, guarantee, things like that, okay? So they're always going to be higher. And what sometimes happens is when you are trying to make the case for your direct sourcing program, or even just straight up contingent labor program, to a hiring leader that's used to getting resources kind of around the program through services providers that are actually contingent labor and not true services, they may push back. And I've had this conversation before at organizations, and I've had someone tell me once, I said, why are you so hesitant about using our approved supply base to fill this? And they told me because staffing suppliers, all right, everybody out there, don't get the pitchforks and torches out, but the staffing suppliers don't provide as good a quality workers as these engineering contractors and things like that, these services suppliers, or the big huge, yeah, I won't mention their name, but like the big four that we all know that you guys probably subcontract to out there all the time, and they jack you up like twice. Anyway, the reason why that is, when he said that, it just blew my mind. I said, don't you realize that the only reason why those candidates are more expensive is because they're building in risk into the equation for pricing bill rates? In fact, I would bet if you pull some of those folks' resumes, you'll see that they've also worked for staffing suppliers in the past as well. So that's something that I would put in there. But if you do things right in your direct sourcing initiative, as a side benefit, you will, if you have pretty good idea what market rates are, you will always drive savings out of that. So hopefully that kind of helps clear that up a bit.
Yes, it does. It does. And of course, if people have more questions, please put it in the chat and we'll try to get to it. Now, earlier, you did talk about, you mentioned a little bit about how direct sourcing, it's not just meant for easy to fill regular roles. You should leverage it also for the purple squirrel, as you call it. Now, given that, what strategies can companies implement to ensure that they attract the top tier talent in a competitive market?
I think that's a huge question. We could almost do an entire call on that. But what I'm going to say is that yes, you want to include easy to fill repetitive roles in your direct sourcing program. But again, as I go back to the purple squirrel roles, can also be very successfully recruited for by your curation team, whether it's internal or external managed curation. They have a knack of being able to locate tough to fill requirements, tough to fill requirements anyway. I mean, we've seen that just in our tier one suppliers over the years at different programs. So why not? I mean, you wouldn't want to withhold those from your direct sourcing program, because again, I go back to, yeah, maybe the first time they may hit that threshold where it goes to tier one suppliers and tier one supply base fills it. But next time they'll be attracting talent into the talent pools that are being curated internally by the direct service program or externally, however you're set up. So you're going to be on top of it the next time. Those candidates in that pool may not all be available, but some of them may. And the other thing too, big thing about talent pooling in your direct sourcing initiative, had to think about that for a minute, is the ability to make sure that you keep those candidates semi-warm. I'm not saying you want to be communicating with them daily, because frankly, that would be pretty annoying to be. I don't know. Some people may. I'll reserve that to other people how they want to be contacted. But you want it frequently enough, and to have some information about what the host company is doing. You know, what's going on with their world, and what do you see it, and blah blah blah. You want to be able to keep in touch to keep those people semi-warm. Again, fine line, frequency of contact, and you know how diligent you are about it. Like I'm saying, there's a fine line between showing up in their driveway with coffee every morning and maybe sending them an email once a quarter or once a month, or heck, I don't know, every few weeks, depending on how many of these roles come up. But anyway, I think that's a good way to be able to ensure that for niche roles on the next go round, they ought to be able to fill them pretty effectively. And that's what we had seen. If you looked in our data at my last employer down through that program, you would see that, yes, The repeatable ones, we're filling those, but it seems like some of the really difficult ones we've been filling pretty effectively as well. And again, I go back to that curation partner, having a long-term relationship and being successful as a sourcing supplier. Again, I didn't really understand the value in that gem of wisdom I shared with one buyer that was going down the journey, but they ended up settling on a long-term supplier to be their curation partner. And that curation partner also had developed their own technology, which I sat through a demo on it a few weeks ago. God, it's been 6 weeks probably. And it was very, very impressive. So I think that's going to be something in the marketplace we're going to see more of. The other thing, and I'm going to maybe jump ahead on a question a little bit here in the interest of time. One of the hurdles that I often hear is, well, we have an MSP and they're not really on board with this idea and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, maybe it's because they don't understand it, right? Because the MSP is still very, very necessary in your program. They're still going to get their fee if you're set up on a supplier funded program, and even an internal funded program for that matter. They are still going to get that piece of the pie, and they're still very relevant and necessary because they are the ones that are in charge of the requisition and the technology, which is the system of record, right? So they really should kind of say, yeah, I mean, if they're interested in as a buyer, if they're interested in talking to you about being, they may have curation services offerings or direct sourcing offerings. It may be very effective to utilize them because, again, they know your business, they know what you're doing, they see all the roles that come through, so they're familiar with what success looks like in your organization from an efficiency perspective. So they may be a good person to put in there. Another thing that I want to throw out, because I think, and this is a buyer pro tip, is that no matter who you go with, if you decide to outsource your curation function, don't feel limited to using their payrolling or AOR, EOR services, right? Be sure to do your own shopping on that. You don't need to bundle everything into one. Does it make sense sometimes? Yes, it does. But be an informed consumer or buyer and go out and compare the rates that they want to, because for an MSP, I think they see direct sourcing and curation and as a way to also bring in payrolling services, which can be more lucrative than what they're doing as an MSP, really, because if you figure they operate on that little thin slice, which is nothing wrong with that, I'm just saying, and I don't blame them for that. And if it makes sense and it's not out of the realm of what you're already paying for payrolling, hey, that could be the way to go. But again, going back to the different tech stacks and the different programs and processes you have in place will help determine your focus moving forward. The other thing I wanted to touch on, since the time is kind of ticking by, is that I want to talk about the fact that the risk level of deploying direct sourcing. I know there's some consternation and a lot of chatter out there because I've heard it at different events, but when you deploy a direct sourcing program, the risk factors are pretty minimal. The worst thing that happens is, hey, my direct sourcing program partner couldn't fill it. So it goes 2 days later or 48 hours or 72 hours later, and it's filled by the tier one sourcing supply base. Okay, so there was a slight delay. Is that problematic? Could be, but it's not a huge risk. I mean, as long as it's filled, eventually it's filled, and it may not make a difference depending on what your overall timelines to fill contingent labor are anyway. So it may not even be noticed in the wash because they may fill it fairly effectively and fairly quickly, the tier one sourcing committee. So that's the other thing that I would put out there. If you're going to deploy these things, there's a lot of chatter that's not necessarily right, and there's a lot of myths out there. The other myth is that it's expensive to do this. Well, frankly, it's not. You're going to save money if you do it right, and if you set it up right, it's not that expensive, and it doesn't require a lot of capital up front. Especially if you go manage direct sourcing, because the technology costs and the curation costs, along with your MSP costs, are what the foundation are that you then build off of by adding the pay rate and the payrolling supplier rate on top of that. And it will still, in many cases, in fact, in most cases, if done right, almost all, will be less than what the market rates are for that worker. So the downsides are few, the upsides are great. if you do it right, a lot of benefits to be able to have better candidates, because sometimes you can attract better candidates and even at a better price point. So you're going to save money. Hiring leaders are going to be happier. It's also a great way to redeploy workers that you've had there before. Being able to have them in the talent pool, so when they finish an engagement, it's favorably, that when the next engagement that fits them comes up, you have them in that talent pool, you can redeploy them. So even if they came from outside of your program, and I know suppliers hate to hear that, but candidate ownership varies. Your mileage may vary from organization to organization. So I personally am a fan of candidate ownership ends 30 days or whenever the drug testing and background checking timeframe expires, that they would have to do a new one. But that's me. Some people disagree with me, but I'm a little more draconian on that, and I think that's the way it should be. But that's me. But hey, whatever works for your organization. Even if you bring in somebody like me, we're going to operate within what you feel the bounds are. So, anyway, those are a couple of other tips I'd like to say on that.
I know you are a huge proponent of direct sourcing. Now, one of the questions I see in the chat, and it's really relevant at this point, is what kind of programs are not worth doing direct sourcing in?
It's a great question. I personally think that programs that may not have it's weird, okay? Because I can't really say, I mean, I may be able to make it work anyway, but I think programs that don't have a lot of name recognition, it may be a little tougher, because there's really no differentiator than if the staffing supplier, their name may be more recognizable. It may be that kind of a scenario. But other than that, I think direct sourcing is very viable. There are tools out there all the way across the spectrum of skills. It's not just IT, engineering, and professional and whatnot. I'm seeing tools, and I've talked with providers that specialize in handling light industrial, for example, or even retail, right? I think direct sourcing, you could talk to some folks at programs out there that I know of, and I'm not going to say names, but if they're out there, they'll probably be listening. But I know retail providers that have deployed direct sourcing programs that are having very, very effective return rates, not only from a cost perspective, but the biggest thing in retail is time. I also think healthcare would benefit from this greatly, because you're crowdsourcing essentially, right? You're trading on the name and you're getting people into a talent pools. And we all know that when you have shifts that need to be filled, like shift work, and you're running 3 shifts a day, huge. So there are tools out there. I think the healthcare industry, light industrial type, very shift. There's some organizations that are under municipal contracts, for example, to make sure that they have shifts ready to go and filled, that can put fees at risk for organizations. So I think direct sourcing and being able to fill open roles quickly and effectively, particularly in shift work scenarios, it's out there. I know curation partners that have either partnered or have now incorporated and bought into companies that specialize in managing shift type work. I think it's amazing. And if you really go back to if you want to go really down a rabbit hole, direct sourcing, you can look at freelancer management system platforms as well, which is technically just another angle on direct sourcing. In a way, you have a need as a client buyer, and you need something very specific done, and you go to a cloud, a freelancer management system cloud provider kind of thing, and you can put that out there and find somebody. So you're essentially directly sourcing, utilizing an FMS provider. So I think really my answer would be that, yeah, I can't really think of any situation where it would hurt an organization. I think some organizations would be better than others. I do think that, and again, I go back to even though I don't want to exclusively say, yeah, just put your easily filled repeatable requisitions in there. I think that's a great way to start, and you want to include, do it that way. I think organizations that have a lot of churn and burn in those types of repeatable positions, absolutely go for it. Especially if you have name brand recognition.
So, if I were to summarize, I would almost say that yes, some industries might find it more successful, some companies might find it more successful, but there's no scenario in which direct sourcing is really going to hurt.
high complexities, right?
Yes.
Particularly if you are in a high risk industry, I'm going to say the oil field, for example, right? If you have what we used to call heavy industrial workers that require a significant workers' comp load, you can also utilize direct sourcing for that. You just have to have the right EOR, AOR partner to be
Mhm.
able to manage that risk, because those roles are traditionally going to be more expensive because of the risk placed on the supplier, right? So I don't think there's any real downsides, and I think there's a lot of flexibility. You can do targeted things. One of the things at my last employer that was amazing was the student program that we had for student interns and co-op students. It was a great experiment and demonstrated the success of how direct sourcing can benefit an organization in a very focused manner, right? So that student program was just amazing. I mean, they within 3 months they had 6,000 candidates, and that was with the
Wow.
curation partner having to recruit and also locate, go to the schools, advertise, use social media. It was just outstanding how that worked, and so that to me is just another targeted use of direct sourcing.
Oh, I love that example. And thank you. I mean, we don't realize the sheer power and the extent to which it can, for a supplier, if they are a curation partner, what kind of opportunity it means is just mind boggling.
Even having a focus on DEI, for example, right? If you have diversity goals that you'd like to see pumped up, like military hiring, for example, or any other type of diversity type initiative, you can set up talent pools for that and direct source using the name and bring them in as contingent workers. So it's limitless. It is the future. I've said this now for the last 3 years, that direct sourcing is the future. The future is plastics. I'm sorry, it's some of you out there may be too young to not to remember Mrs. Robinson, and anyway.
Uh, uh, my questions are done, but there are questions in the chat, and we have a couple of minutes more. Uh, the next question is actually from a supplier point of view, which is great. How can suppliers contribute to direct sourcing initiatives when companies implement direct sourcing?
This is where I think you have to change your focus as a supplier. Again, I go back to, you either need to up your game and be a top-notch supplier in the program so you stay in tier one, so when things don't get filled by the direct sourcing program, you're there. Or secondly, you need to start focusing on maybe making a shift and building out the fact that you can also be a payrolling provider for that organization, or an EOR, employer of record, agent of record type provider. And then the third piece is, as a supplier, you may want to take a look at farming in some of the organizations where you have been a top supplier consistently, statistically. And if they're pursuing direct sourcing, float and say, hey, I'd like to put my hat in the ring for being being the curation partner for that. I think those are some of the angles that you could pursue to increase your business and also kind of change with the times a little bit. And again, this is not, it's not all doom and gloom for suppliers. You just are going to have to be a really top-notch, excellent supplier to and ensure that your performance stays such and that you're in tier one, because you're still going to have opportunities. There's never going to be a program, a direct sourcing initiative that's going to be able to fill every requisition possible. And you're going to have to get creative about fishing in different locations and being effective. Again, I go back to some of the grief I catch online, but pointing out, hey, if you're going to send out a text, don't send out a nebulous text with just 2 words for the job title that could be a million different positions. Put something in there that explains it succinctly, that can get the attention of those passive workers that may not be ready to jump yet, but if the right opportunity came along. So you're going to have to tweak your operations and your delivery, and you will be successful as a supplier no matter what, whether you decide to dip your foot into the curation pool and throw your hat in the ring, or whether you just want to continue to be a top supplier. Face it, you're going to have less competition anyway, because the bottom suppliers statistically are going to end up being transitioned out of most programs.
Thank you so much, Eric. the one aspect that I loved about today's chat was there's something for the buyers, there's something for the MSPs, there was something for suppliers. Each one of us probably walked away with a lot of valuable points. Leah mentions, thank you, great talk. She also sent good wishes for a quick recovery on the power front in Houston. And uh, thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to Eric. And we have a bunch of other people who said that it was a great talk and direct sourcing is here to stay. This was a great chat. Thank you so much for doing it, Eric. Really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me here. And if anybody has any further questions, go ahead and send them to Anu, and I'll be happy to answer them. I have a little bit of time on my hands as I listen to the hum of the generator here, so I can answer further questions. And if you need some help as a buyer, let me know.
Yes, repeating what Eric was saying, please put in your questions, send it to me. You can continue putting it in the chat and I'll make sure that Eric gets them. You can also keep in touch with us. We are on social media. I've shared the slide. Last time I shared a wrong slide, but I hope you can see the slide which says Indotronics Avani Group across LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. So we love to hear from you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks, Eric. And hope you get your current very soon. Power very
Absolutely.
soon.
Appreciate it. Bye now.